the Kabbalah tree of life, and this is a reference you're understandably not going to get, Tucker, because it's Nintendo 64. The numogram is essentially the Majora's Mask to the regular Kabbalah tree of life's ocarina of time. It is the dark, shadowy, upside down, much more heavily satanic version of it. It actually comes from Kenneth Grant, the guy we've been talking about. He wrote a book, Night Side of Eden, I think in 1977. And it was about how while using the Kabbalah tree of life, there were these hidden subterranean darker paths. That there were these more, he would say through the tunnels of Set, who, kind of not unrelated to Satan, that he would use to be in contact with stuff. So long story short, with the numogram and the way Lan uses it, what's important here from just a weirdness perspective, you've got a way to contact heaven, but more importantly, a way to contact hell. And you've got the 8th gate and the 9th gate. The 9th gate, not quite related, but not unrelated to the Roman Polanski, Johnny Depp movie, The 9th Gate, where Depp's character comes in contact with hell. So what they believe is they are literally contacting hell in some cases for divination purposes.
To see the future.
Or just to see anything, just for insight. And that brings us back.
For knowledge.
And he even has a point about the number 666, where a lot of these numbers, he calls it theosophical math. You have triangle numbers, which is, if you stack these things like they're a triangle, like the triangle number of 9 is 45. That's why it's 45 there. There are only so many triangle numbers. One of them is 666, and that is the triangle number of 36, which is an important part of the numogram. So when Lan realized this, he was like, of course it's 666. So what I'm getting at, you are getting involved in heavily, wildly Luciferian stuff. And Lan, on this podcast, he says, well, what about people who say you're communicating with Satan, which Lan will also talk about being, in communication with Satan. He'll say Christians who say that, he goes, I am not unsympathetic towards that. He goes, they're more right than most because I am in contact with something from the outside. He goes, and,
I just can't overstate how disqualifying I find that. I feel sorry for anyone who plays around with that stuff.
Tucker's out of the interview. He's like, okay.
No, but I'm just saying, anyone who says, I really get a lot of inspiration from a guy who's controlled by Satan, I'm going to leave it to God to decide, what happens to that person. But that person has disqualified himself.
Totally.
In my view, as someone I will listen to. I don't want to be led by that person. Like, we should run away from that person at high speed.
You typically also don't want to put them in charge of your kids, typically. But,
Well, that's kind of it. And it's so funny. You hear people, I get written letters from people a lot every day. And half of them are like, I feel like this country or this world is controlled by Satanists. And on one level, you're like, oh, come on. But no, I think they can feel that there are spiritual roots to the destruction of the West.
Oh, totally. No.
And they're right.
No, you're fighting a spiritual battle.
You start playing with this stuff. Is it surprising that people are like ODing on fentanyl on the sidewalk in our nation's capital, or that we've imported like 1 million Haitians? Like what is all that? Well, of course, it's punishment.
Especially with the drugs, what we consider just letting people harm themselves as a kind of compassion or freedom. We step in and say, this is not any sort of good freedom to let people just destroy themselves.
Well, of course it's not, but it's evil.
Right.
Obviously. Letting people kill themselves is evil. If a man's standing on a bridge and going to jump and you can pull him back and you don't.
Right.
What is that? It's evil.
You're saying on some sort of freedom thing. This gets us into the Antichrist question, which has been going on in Silicon Valley.
Before we get into
the Antichrist.
What is the Antichrist?
The Antichrist, in the same way the figure of a Messiah or Christ is prefigured in the Bible. Throughout the Old Testament, you have types. You have figures and stories and symbols, and they're real people, but they still prefigure the figure of Jesus. The most famous of which is Joseph, where Joseph famously has 12 brothers. They are all named after the eventual tribes of Israel. He is sold into slavery by one of the brothers. The one that decides to do that is Judah. Do you know what Judah translated into Greek is?
No.
Judas.
Huh.
So Judah, like Judas, says, hey, I've got an idea. Let's just sell this guy. It's horrible. Joseph is sent, he goes to prison. Like Jesus on the cross with the two thieves, Joseph is with the two prisoners. They're asked famously, what will come of me? They say you're a dreamer. And Joseph says to one of them, he says to one of them, you're going to have your decapitated, you're going to have your head taken off. Only at a birthday party. Birthday parties, by the way, only mentioned twice in the Bible, both times decapitations. In that story, in Genesis, and then with John the Baptist, and Salome and whatnot. But so anyway, but like with Jesus, Joseph says to the other guy, he goes, you will actually be lifted up by Pharaoh. He says to one of the prisoners, you will be lifted up. This, in many ways, prefigures Jesus talking with the two thieves, Joseph and Jesus, where he says to one of the thieves, you will be with me in paradise. He says that to one of them. And then like with Jesus, Joseph, he's now at the right hand of the Father, so to speak. He's at the right hand of Egypt. He's the second in command. And the 12 brothers who are now in peril, during the 7 years of famine coming up and, they're going to be arrested, they see that the man that they rejected, Joseph, this is the man they're talking to. They thought he was dead.
And he is their savior.
Yeah, but he was not just their savior, but it was the one that they rejected previously. That Judas was the one that he betrayed and had the idea of getting rid of him. But this is the man that will save them. In the Bible, that story prefigures a lot of the doctrine surrounding Jesus, where the 12 tribes of Israel come to realize that the one that they had rejected is actually their savior. And there's this tremendous sense of, what have we done? But also like relief that the savior so recognizes them. In other words, the Joseph story prefigures the Jesus story.
Yeah. So
the other main prefiguring figure in the Bible is Antichrist. And aspects of him, obviously in what's called the New Testament. But, Arthur Pink has a book from 100 years ago, The Antichrist, which is very influential in evangelical circles. And Arthur Pink was also a theosophist too. So you get into this kind of backside of the same doctrines type stuff. He previously was a theosophist. But, whether it's Pharaoh being a type of Antichrist, and again, in Exodus, the 9 plagues, Pharaoh, in Revelation, the plagues come back. Now you have Antichrist. Pharaoh's persecuting the Jewish people. Now the Antichrist is persecuting the Jewish people. The Antichrist is this mysterious figure prefigured in the Bible. He's not quite known, but in the same way the Old Testament prophets were familiar with the concept of a Messiah, but didn't know he would be Jesus. So moderns today are similarly aware of the concept of an Antichrist without being fully aware of who he will actually be. But they have clues and doctrines about who he is. That is a rough, some would say very rough, concept of the Antichrist. But that is essentially him in the Bible as a type of a person. So, but he is essentially the, unlike Jesus, man of sorrows, totally rejected by the world, the Antichrist will be regarded as a savior, a hero, and temporarily will be received like Jesus you would thought would be received.
Thanks for watching our YouTube channel. We hope you'll subscribe to it. And by the way, you can hit the little bell on there and get notifications every time we produce a video. We hope you'll do that also.